This is Overruled with Brad and David from Scott Vicknair.
Good morning, everybody. This is David Vicknair and Brad Scott, and welcome back to the Overruled podcast. Overruled brought to you by Scott Vicknair. We're excited to be with you here this morning. We have a couple of really exciting hot topics, and Brad, I'm going to let you jump right into your hot topic for the day before our guest that comes on in a little bit.
Sure thing. Last week, I think I scared y'all a little bit with the whole TikTok thing and all the big data watching us. What caught my attention last week or in the last couple of days is this letter from the Future of Life Institute. I don't know if y'all have seen this, but Elon Musk, Steve Wozniak of Apple, plus 1,100 other big tech leaders have signed on to this letter. They're calling for a 6-month ban or moratorium on AI systems being developed. I don't know if you've seen all the news with the Chat GPT and all those things out there, but this new technology and AI stuff is kind of, they're touting this as being game changers as far as society and technology, things like that. But essentially, they're asking for this time period for everybody just to kind of stand down. They're kind of scared that this AI technology is kind of, the horse has kind of gotten out the barn a little too far, and they're wanting the government to come in and maybe regulate this stuff. Figure out who's going to have power to control this stuff, to legislate what it can and cannot be used for. It's very interesting, what their motives are at this point, whether you believe them at their face that they really just want to get ahead of things, or whether this is possibly the greatest marketing letter ever written to, drum up, people being scared of this technology and run and invest in it. Either way, this is kind of a big deal as far as what's moving on right now. One of the things that they say they want cease training of any AI systems that are more powerful than the current GPT-4, and they're citing about runaway AI and threat it poses to humanity. That's pretty ominous caution there. And the first thing I thought of is if you think of all the movies from Hollywood over the last few decades, Hollywood has been scaring us about this basically forever. Even going back to like the 1960s, 2001, A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's classic sci-fi thriller. Right. For you, I'm sure everybody's seen it by now, but the computer on board HAL takes over, starts systematically killing the whole crew. Movies like that, movies like The Matrix from 1999, that's where everybody was living humanity was living in a simulation, basically. So the question is, are we finally getting to that point where technology is reaching that point where the computers are going to take over potentially? It's a little scary, the stuff that they're warning about. And they're asking for government intervention to come in and to protect us from all this. One of the lines I saw, they're saying that the decisions about AI should not be delegated to unelected tech leaders, and that more powerful AI systems should only be developed once we are confident their effects will be positive and their risk will be manageable. Kind of reminding me of Uncle Ben from Spider-Man. If you remember, he said, with great power comes great responsibility. So, where are we going with this? What's going to happen? The one thing for sure, the little bit I've gone down this rabbit hole with Chat GPT and things of that nature, this really is a paradigm shift as far as technology. If you're a business owner out there, this is something you really need to get ahead of. You need to start incorporating it into your business, because if not, your competition definitely is going to be doing it. And this is innovation. You need to get on top of it and use it as best you can. But it's kind of scary that these people are saying, we need to basically freeze this for 6 months. That's a pretty bold statement coming out of big tech.
I guess one of the first things I have, Brad, thinking about this is to what extent you saw that either Elon Musk or Wozniak have financial interest adverse to the founders of ChatGPT or in them.
Well, I think all these guys, and I didn't look into it that deep, but I think all of them have their hands in it financially. And, if you're the guy that has some of the best technology and you want to stop everybody else from kind of developing it to get a leg up, the question is whether it's financial motives, or are they really worried about humanity and the computers taking over at this point?
Sure. I mean, at many occasions, one of the first places I look to is the old adage, follow the money. Right. So I'm curious to see if their statements are aligned with their interests financially, either being adverse to the people who have now cornered the market initially on AI and ChatGPT, or if they're aligned with them. You have seen, right, and I hate to just hit Elon Musk with that and assume bad motives. For example, in the Ukrainian-Russian incursion, that he donated his Starlink technology significantly to ensure that Russia was not able to cut off Ukrainian telecommunications through bombing. So we have seen Elon Musk perform some altruistic, non-financially motivated.
But follow the money.
Yeah, no doubt.
And interestingly enough, there is 1,100 of these tech giants that signed off on this letter. The one person that was notable not to be signing it was the founder and owner of the OpenAI, who has the ChatGPT. So I don't know if there's a threat there that they're perceiving, possibly. Whether what really are their motives here, but if nothing more, it's really putting this stuff in the spotlight, and everybody's definitely talking about it, and we'll see what happens with it. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
I think you made a good point too. It's like one of the things we get in the legal development organization magazines that we're both members of for the law firm, and the communications that really are challenging us to think critically on business growth and how to manage the business effectively, is this introduction of ChatGPT, AI involved with ChatGPT, and how it can be integrated into different businesses, whether it be a law firm, an accounting firm,
anywhere,
a medical company, a construction company. And I think the main thing I'm seeing and reading about it and seeing different business coaches comment on it and business development leaders comment on it is you need to start getting connected to it and understand it now and figure out in small ways how can you connect it to your business. Not necessarily jump into the swimming pool head on and do everything all at once, but how do you get into it and really understand it and figure out small practical ways you can use it to leverage your business now, and then as you become more familiar with it, maybe do more down the road.
It's a tool. Like anything else in technology, it's a tool. And it's here to stay. It's not going away. So it's something I think we've played with it a little bit in our practice, for copywriting and for things like that. But it is an amazing thing. And the little bit I played with it, it's quite scary what it's capable of doing when you start feeding information into it. So it's really going to change things. So it's here to stay. So we need to look at it. What do you have, David?
Well, my hot topic for the week, I hate to be duplicative and jump right back into the recall again. Hopefully this is the last time we have to talk about it, but there are so many legal issues surrounding it, I just couldn't resist. So, recall, election, LaToya Cantrell, the local registrar, as our listeners probably know now, who have been following that really big topic locally, has certified that the recall effort did not meet the required threshold, which was set by a settlement, which we discussed on the last show, at roughly 44,000 signatures. In the last show, Brad, you and I were discussing interventions. Why has the mayor not intervened in this lawsuit to stop a settlement before the train got ahead and too far ahead of her?
Maybe she was ahead of the train.
Well, we'll get to that in a second. So what she did do is her attorneys did file two separate lawsuits. One was filed in the 19th Judicial District Court in the Parish of East Baton Rouge, seeking to invalidate that settlement by Kyle Ardon as unconstitutional under Louisiana law. For our listeners who don't know, typically when there are large administrative law or legal challenges involving state representatives and the governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state, those are typically filed in the East Baton Rouge Parish because that is the exclusive venue for a lot of those actions to be brought. She filed a mandamus there seeking to invalidate the settlement as unconstitutional, and also
Which is what we talked about last time.
We did, and also filed a nullity action and a petition to vacate in civil district court seeking to nullify and vacate that settlement as unconstitutional. For our listeners, since who may not be lawyers, since the recall is now effectively over, we think, which we'll get to in a second. These two lawsuits, from my review, would be what is called legally moot, meaning they no longer can be judicially ripe for determination because the underlying issues surrounding the recall are over, so they're likely going to go away. She did file suit, though. She did not intervene. And in the civil district court case, the second issue flying around since our last show was that it had been disclosed that Judge Medley, who we are routinely in front of in civil district court, we've already had a trial in front of her, she's a new judge, had actually signed the recall petition, but did not disclose it to the litigants in the recall case. And it raised questions about whether that would merit her recusal under state law related to judicial recusals for not being able to be impartial. And I can just say, being in front of Judge Medley a handful of times now, she's very accommodating, a very nice judge. She works well with all the attorneys who are in front of her and has gotten good reviews. And since those issues were raised, she in fact signed an order which asked the Supreme Court to appoint an ad hoc judge. For our listeners, an ad hoc judge is essentially someone who's appointed in an interim basis to potentially resolve recusal issues or things of that nature. And the state Supreme Court is typically the party who is always appointing judges to determine whether a judge does or does not need to be recused. And so she signed an order asking the Supreme Court of Louisiana to weigh in on that. That is likely also moot now that the recall is sort of fizzled out and did not meet the required signatures available. But I thought it was just a very interesting issue, is whether or not her signature on the recall itself merited recusal. Some experts on judicial ethics and the judicial canons which govern judges have commented that probably not, but that it would have been best practice for her to disclose it to the litigants.
It's an appearance of impropriety. So I think it's a good move on her part, very smart, and it's something I would expect of her, having been before her. She doesn't want to taint the system in any way. So if she signed the petition, she said she's probably not the right person to oversee that action if it was to go forward. I think it was the right move. Whether it was legally required of her or not, I'm not sure. But definitely, since she was one of the named petitioners in the application, it does make a whole lot of sense to go that way.
So we got the mayor's lawsuits that were filed. We have the recusal issue that comes down the pike since our last show in discussing the recall. And then the mother of all legal issues on the recall is that the recall organizers, as a quick primer, had 180 days under Louisiana law from the filing of the petition to recall an elected official with the Secretary of State to collect the signatures and then submit it to the local register of voters, who in Orleans Parish is Sandra Wilson. They submitted they submitted a batch of signatures, 34,625 on that 180th day on February 22nd. And that initial batch, which the register had 20 days to go through, there was a failure rate of about 21.5%. So there were approximately 27,000 signatures that were accepted as valid. Under the Secretary of State's settlement, they needed approximately another 17,000 on top of that 27,000 to hit that 44,000 number to trigger a recall vote. After the 180 days, state election law also allows what is called a 5-day, or commented on as a 5-day grace period, that there can be more signature submissions of voters who would like to add their name to the recall, but did not sign initially. And curiously, without much explanation from the recall campaign whatsoever, on the 5th day of that period, they showed up with a second batch, which had approximately 32,421 signatures on it, and submitted it to the register. The register went through those and said that about, I believe it was 26,207 were listed as rejected for other. And the explanation given by the register's lawyer is that that 5-day period has a different requirement than the 180-day period. And two of the primary ones is the 5-day period requires the month, day, and year of your birthday, where the 180-day period just requires you to put the year of your birthday. And the second is that the voter has to show some intent in the 5-day period directing the register to add them to the recall. What it looks to me like, from reading all the news articles and scanning as much as I can, is that they had another 26 potential thousand signatures that they just didn't turn in on time.
Oh, wow.
Which is somewhat shocking considering that they had spent over $1 million on this recall effort. And I come to that conclusion because if you look at the 34,421 signatures that were submitted in the second batch in that 5-day period, there were specific reasons that the register gave to reject some of them. For example, there were listed reasons for about 6,256 of those signatures in her letter to the governor on why they were rejected. The reasons cited from duplicate signatures to non-legible signatures to those signed without a witness or a date. In fact, some of those 6,000, about 12 of them, were voters who she found to be deceased. But for the other 26,207 signatures, keep in mind, they only needed 17,000 more signatures. Of the other 26,207 signatures, they were tossed out for the reason other. And I have determined, just my impression of the situation is, and there's been experts, including Joshua Spivak, who's a California-based attorney and national recall expert, who has commented that it just looks like they were turned in late. And if you would have applied the same 20% rejection rate on those signatures to the prior signatures submitted, that they probably would have hit the 44,000, maybe even the 49,000 they needed before they reached the settlement with the Secretary of State to trigger the recall. So I believe the register, from what I can see, and obviously we're jumping to conclusions here based on available news media reporting and comments that either the register or the governor or the register's lawyer has made, it looks as if they just turned in half the signatures late, and there's a specific legal application for how those signatures in that 5-day grace period are treated differently than the 180-day period. And the register's lawyer basically told her they didn't meet that criteria, so they have to be rejected.
Didn't dot the I's and cross the T's. Those little things make a big difference.
And as you know, as we talked about on the prior show, because there's so little case law developed related to the application of various recall law in Louisiana, it really is an open question about whether her legal determination on the treatment of those signatures is correct or not. There have been election law experts and other legal commentators on that who have said that the statute seems clear. If anything I've learned in doing this for a long time, there's not that much that is clear. So I don't think you can rule out a legal challenge from the campaign, probably through something like a writ of mandamus directing the register to give reasons for why she rejected these 26,000 signatures. But at this point in time, it has failed, and short of any type of legal challenge against her determination on those 26,000, it appears that her determination was probably legal appropriate because the statute does require two different things in that 5-day period that are different and distinct from that 180-day period.
They just missed them. So the momentum has definitely shifted here. This may be the death kill to this recall campaign.
Yeah, and so on the merits, no commentary. What I can say is legal issues flying all over it. It's an interesting legal scenario, from recusal issues, from writs of mandamus and nullity actions, all the things that we routinely see that maybe the listeners don't really care about because it's not cases they have vested interest in, but because the recall was such a high-profile campaign, there were a lot of legal issues of interest that were flying into it.
When you throw the legal system and politics into the same boat, you usually get a mess.
Yeah.
So here we are.
No doubt. All right, our guest today on Overruled is a close friend and lawyer at the firm, Jennifer Greene. Jenny, as known by all of her friends, is a very well-known, and she's going to probably recoil when I say this, but prominent attorney and involved in local politics and friend of many. Really excited to have Jenny today to talk about her perspective on her law practice, how she got into her law practice and her road and journey in her practice of law, as well as her involvement in local politics, her perspective on politics, as well as her involvement in philanthropy and what drives her and motivates her to be super involved in philanthropy. Jenny, welcome to Overruled. Brad and I are excited to have you as a guest today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So first, I was hoping you could tell our listeners a little bit about your road to becoming a lawyer. What motivated you to become a lawyer? How did you get where you are today?
Well, it started when I was very young. My father was a trial attorney. I'm actually a fourth-generation attorney, and I'd seen throughout my life the impact that a lawyer can have on people. And I've told this story before. We were checking into a hotel in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was probably around 5 or 6 years old. And I went inside with my dad to check us in. When we went to check in, the man behind the counter just asked my dad, "So what do you do for a living?" And my dad said, "Well, I'm a lawyer." And this man got very serious and was like, "I love lawyers." And I'd never heard anyone say that to my dad before. Most of the time people are like, "I hate lawyers."
Usually the opposite. Yeah.
Exactly. So the man told a story about how his uncle was injured in an accident at work and how everyone had abandoned his uncle. His wife had abandoned him, his kids had abandoned him, and the only person who stuck with him was his lawyer. And this man had such admiration for the lawyer, his uncle's lawyer, and just told my dad, "Man, I just really appreciate what you all do." And I remember the feeling that I had walking away from that desk and just being like, wow, I want that feeling again. And so I grew up watching my dad in court. I've also told this story to people before. Judges would frequently stop the proceeding and ask who the small child was sitting on the bench, and it was me, obviously. And so I just grew up watching lawyers and having such great admiration for the difference that we can make in people's lives, and that's literally all I've ever wanted to be.
And I know from being good friends with you and talking a lot about this, I think your dad was a critical and motivating force in your journey to becoming a lawyer, and was a very accomplished and successful trial lawyer in Arkansas. Can you talk a little bit about his accomplishments and his influence on you becoming a lawyer?
So, as I just told the story about, my dad being a lawyer and me watching him try cases, I also got the opportunity to spend a lot of time watching him interact with his clients and seeing the things that he did. My dad did both civil litigation on the plaintiff side and criminal defense. And there were, I definitely met lots of characters when I was younger, not short on characters around our house. And my dad's clients were, essentially, he would take them under his wing in any way he could. We had some of his clients, who wanted to pay my dad and didn't have money, and so they would ask if they could come mow our lawn. And it was just great seeing my dad with those people. And then hearing the stories, my dad had 10 capital murder cases in a row. And I remember those days and how exhausted my dad was after those trials, but he was literally fighting for someone's life. And then on the civil side, he was fighting for people to get justice, whether they were injured by, an overturned train spilling chemicals in neighborhoods, or someone who was injured by a defective vehicle or things like that. And just seeing my dad fight to get justice for those people, it just meant the world to me. So that's my dad's an influence on my life every day and in most things that I do. My mom is as well. I often say that if I can be 1/10 of the person that either of my parents are, then I'll be doing all right.
And that comes up a lot. We see with a lot of people who are successful. They all have mentors that they've kind of followed in their shoes with. Our guest last time, Machi, same thing. And it seems like your dad was that person for you, which is great. And it's nice to have that, as a father figure and also as a mentor, and lead you through that path. And ultimately, you became a lawyer as well. Have you had the opportunity to mentor other people like that as well to pass it along?
I'd like to think that I have. You probably have to ask them. I do have one person who was a associate at my former law firm, and we, to this day, are great friends. In fact, I just went to visit he and his wife in New Hampshire a little over a month ago. And he jokes that he often asks himself in his practice, well, what would Jenny do? And it keeps him on the right path and keeps him from making some critical mistakes that some other attorneys may make in his practice. So I like to think that I pay it forward or pass it on. Mm-hmm. I also had a great mentor at my former law firm. Hopefully he never hears this because I don't think he needs his ego. Steve Lane does not need an ego boost.
A lawyer with an ego.
Imagine that.
Yes.
So he's like my older brother, but he also really mentored me in my practice. And I would say we learned a lot from each other in practicing law and how to practice. But he would throw me in the deep end. My first hearing all by myself, he was out of town and was unavailable.
By design?
Yes. And so it was like just me on my own, and he threw me in the deep end.
That's
luckily,
how we learned.
Yeah, I was like, luckily I treaded water.
Yeah.
It was a simple motion, to be clear. It was a motion to continue. But if I had lost it, we would have had to go forward that day. Thankfully, I didn't lose it.
Well, that's I think we've all been there. And part of the way you learn and practice, whether it be in law or something else, just to get in there and make some mistakes and kind of fumble your way around. Some people call it fake it till you make it, but you got to make the mistakes and learn the lessons, right, before you can really become good at something. One of the things that I know of you that you're very involved in, Jenny, is philanthropy is very important to you. And while a lot of the stuff that we talk on this show is connected to business development and leadership and life, I think philanthropy is a critical aspect of that sometimes cannot be thought of. What is it about philanthropy? What is your motivating force behind being involved in the different philanthropic efforts that you're in?
Well, it's going to go back to I learned it from my parents. I do not know where this phrase originated, but I learned it from my dad, and it was like, if you are, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit, if you are privileged, you should build a bigger table, not a higher fence. And that's something that always stuck with me. And when I think about lawyers, we, by our nature, we're privileged. We're privileged to have the education we have. We are privileged to have the opportunities that we have, the respect that our profession gets. Not always, but the respect I think we should get. To me, that it is almost essential to be involved in your community and give back to your community when you are in a position of privilege. I mean, to me, it's almost abhorrent if you don't. And so I think having your finger on the pulse of what's going on in your community has to include being involved with nonprofits. And we have some amazing nonprofits here in New Orleans. I'll make a little pitch for an organization called Emerging Philanthropists of New Orleans. It's probably the coolest thing I've done. Well, one of the coolest things I've done since I moved to New Orleans. They take 50 young professionals and divide them into teams of 10. It may be 60, so don't hold me to that. But 10 people per team, and each team picks a topic area. So it could be the environment, it could be healthcare, it could be education and youth development. And they teach them how to evaluate nonprofits. Like they teach you how to read the nonprofits' tax forms. They teach you how to do a site visit. They teach you what questions to ask on these interviews. And then at the end, each team gets to grant out $10,000 to a local nonprofit. So this organization has been around for, I think, 15 years now. It started here. It's something where it not only teaches you about nonprofits around the city, but it also teaches you how to be a responsible giver and like a responsible philanthropist. I believe in voting with your dollars. So you want to know where your money goes.
Teaches the process.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people want to contribute to the programming of a nonprofit. Like they want to be the sponsor of a race or the sponsor of, or they want to, be on the committee for the big gala. But a lot of times what nonprofits need help with are basic things like
it's the behind the scene things that have the biggest
toner
impact.
Cartridges or printer paper or those kinds of things. And that's one thing that EPNO really tries to teach these young professionals is that you want to meet the organization where it is and meet the needs that they have, even if it's not something sexy like a race or something like that. So philanthropy is just something that I believe in. I like to volunteer my time as much as I am willing to donate money. And I think that's something that as a profession we need to be more focused on, is giving of our time. A lot of people are willing to write a check, but they're not willing to go, scrub down a shower at a new home built for a musician in the city, or they're not willing to spend their Saturday, folding clothes at, Dress for Success. So I think those are things that are, as a profession, I think we should be more focused on giving back to our communities. It's something I try to do.
I personally think in life there's always people who talk, but action's a lot different than talking. Action speaks louder. I think from a leadership perspective, besides like what we all probably feel like when we get involved with philanthropy, there's a great feeling that you get from being able to give back and help and paying it forward. But isn't there, and I'm curious your perspective on this, my perspective on it is there's some level of obligation on people who own businesses, who are professionals, who are community leaders, to act and to be leaders as it relates to philanthropy, because that sends a message irrespective of what comes out of their mouth. If they're willing to commit their time to an organization, like I know how involved you are with Dress for Success, and as well as your involvement that you've been involved with Komen and other organizations like that, what level of it from your perspective is important to show leadership that your involvement is, and let your actions speak words?
Well, I think a lot of organizations want lawyers in particular to serve on their boards for some obvious reasons and some not so obvious reasons. And so board service is important, and organizations need attorneys for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they have employment issues, sometimes they have contract questions, sometimes they need you to negotiate a lease. But we can't forget our own humanity and forget that there's also value in, for example, I really enjoy volunteering at Dress for Success. In fact, I need to sign up and do that soon, where you go in and you get to help someone who's going on a job interview pick out clothes, pick out accessories, which I love accessories. So, and so I really had never realized until I did that the difference that clothing makes in someone's self-confidence. And so I'd realized it, but I'd taken it for granted for so long. And just seeing someone for the first time having what they consider to be a professional outfit and just watching the transformation.
It changes their mindset completely.
Absolutely. Changes their posture.
Yes.
That's something that I thought was so cool is they stand a little taller, they walk a little taller, and then helping them prep for an interview. I've done mock interviews at YEP, which is another nonprofit here. It's a phenomenal organization that helps young people. And so they had me come in and do mock interviews with some of their graduates. And it's called Youth Empowerment Project, if anyone doesn't know it. And just watching these young people and how excited they were about going on job interviews. And it just reminded me a little bit, sometimes in this profession, Brad and David may disagree, but I feel like we lose a little bit of our humanity sometimes. Mm-hmm. And doing things like that really reminds me of what it's all about. I think it also helps, being a lawyer, to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening. And so I think interacting with people, in different situations helps you kind of know what's going on in the city.
And helping give those people a boost. That's
Absolutely.
The biggest thing.
Well, and the phrase that Dress for Success and some other organizations use is it's a hand up, not a hand out. And so it's like the whole rising tides lift all boats. I mean, I can keep throwing out cliches.
Sure.
But no, it's true.
I think it really resets your values. I kind of look at it as that. Like, we get so caught up to, you're talking about in the practice of law, but we have listeners who may operate different types of business, whether it be industrial based, and other types of companies, and you get so caught up in running a business or in your job and in routine things. Sometimes you need a little reset, prioritization of giving back to the community, family time, focusing on spending time and allocating it to your family. And I find, at least, and I'm sure you do to some extent as well, that philanthropy helps those values get reset and really give you some broader perspective on things that you get so caught up in the rat race every day that you kind of lose track of. But I do want to shift gears a little bit, because I know you're super involved in local politics, many times behind the scenes.
That's what I prefer to be.
I know you prefer to be behind the scenes. What is from your perspective, what is your involvement? Why do you say so involved in local politics? What is your passion there? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I wish that I could put up billboards or figure out some other way to remind people how important state and local elections are. The things that impact your daily life, they don't really happen in DC. They happen in your city council chambers, or as some people in Louisiana call it, the police jury. They happen in your school board meetings. They happen in board and commission meetings. It's the things that people don't realize, like traffic flow, or all of the things that just impact your daily life. Judges, if I could just beat a drum all day about how much judges matter, and it's so hard to get people to pay attention to judicial elections. But for me, again, it goes back to being invested in your community, and being involved in your community is like knowing who makes the rules. A lot of people think the city council, when people are running for city council here, they get asked about, all kinds of issues that they have zero control over. And so I always think about that. It's like, know who makes the rules for what? Know who makes the rules for what it is that you care about. And I think that a lot of times that gets lost because people just want to talk about our congressmen or the president or senators or anything like that. But so much happens on the state and local level that people just don't realize. And so that's why it's important to me to be involved. Goes back to, again, being involved in your community.
That's an interesting point, too, because, a lot of people are captivated with all this stuff on the national news scene, from CNN to MSNBC,
Facebook,
all that stuff. And it focuses on big national issues.
Right.
But those aren't the things that really affect us in our everyday life. It's really the smaller things at a local level and at a state level that are going to have the biggest impact on our families and our loved ones and our businesses. And those are the easy ones to overlook. Most people look right past those to the evening news on everything that's going on elsewhere.
Absolutely. And I think that people don't realize how much judges matter until they have to go in front of one. I've been out with different judges, campaigning with them and waving signs with them. And there are people who will, if we're out waving signs, pull over and talk to the judge about the case that they had in front of them and what the judge did or didn't do that they did or didn't like. And so I think until people are in front of a judge, they don't realize how important judges really are.
Until it's very personal when you're standing in that courtroom, you don't really pay attention to it a lot of times.
Right. And so if all the listeners out there, please pay attention to your judicial elections.
Well,
That's my pitch.
and they're gonna. I know we've talked about this before, but for you, for example, you have been handling family law matters for a bulk of your legal career, and so somebody for example, in a family law matter, a divorce, a custody dispute, that is, if you don't resolve it, that's going to be decided by a judge. Brad, who manages nearly 200 estates a year, successions, when somebody dies in your family, if there is a dispute, that is going to be decided by a judge. And so those are just two areas that a judge will make decisions potentially in your personal life.
With huge implications.
Huge implications.
Right.
I can promise you, you're more likely to interact with a local judge than with Senator Kennedy or Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, right? That's
Absolutely.
the whole point. And tell us a little bit about, in your involvement in politics, I know you've done like some work representing PACs and as in your legal practice, but also been involved in politics. What are some big lessons, takeaways that you've learned from your involvement over the years in politics?
Ooh, there's probably so many, but I'll try to.
I know that's a hard question for you to answer.
I know. I'm like, gosh, I could talk for an hour about that. One of the things I've learned, and I guess you learn this in anything, but like trust your gut, but verify. So a lot of times in politics, people will tell you what you want to hear or what they think you want to hear. And my response to that is usually some sort of verification. I've also learned to be deliberate in what I say because you never know when that's going to come back to you. And know who you can and can't trust. That's really important. But I've always been someone who speaks their mind, and I think, some local politicians who I'm friendly with will tell you that I definitely speak my mind when I talk to them. I may not speak my mind about them in public, but I certainly tell them when I talk to them individually. And I think that what I like to focus on is electing the right person, not necessarily electing someone who agrees with me on everything, because that's never going to happen. I don't even agree with myself sometimes. So, that's not going to happen. But I think electing the people who are going to be willing to make the hard decisions and people who are going to keep, I know this is going to make everyone roll their eyes, but keep their promises. David's rolling his eyes right now.
You knew I was going to roll my eyes on that one.
I do.
But it comes down to character.
It does. And I think that the more that you pay attention to what's going on in state and local politics, you can kind of figure out who is or isn't going to be an effective leader or who you can or can't trust. And those are the people, again, these are the people who are making the decisions. They're making the rules. So I think that that's important. I also think the thing about working in politics is that you have to think about the impact you have. I mean, our state and local leaders have a huge impact, and judges have a huge impact. So that's another thing that I've learned is watching the impact individuals can have on a larger population.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question on the trusting part of that. Trusting politician, is it an oxymoron? I don't know. But I wonder how you navigate that process specifically, because the example I would give is in a business, when Brad or I or the firm is thinking about working with a particular vendor, like this morning, for example, I was on the phone with a lawyer from Florida asking about his experiences with this vendor over the last 6 years. There are different things in due diligence, either in acquisitions of businesses, in working with third-party vendors, things like that, that you can go and verify, hey, is this person who they said they are? What is their track record? That type of thing.
There's a method for vetting them.
Absolutely. In politics, many times you don't have that, right? Because somebody may have not been in politics and is just jumping in, especially at the local level. That could be an entry point. But like, how do you navigate this? I know this about you. You are a trusting person. You are a good person. So like, how do you navigate that process in politics of trusting when you're almost routinely, I would say, being set up to be disappointed?
If someone has been in politics, you can look at their voting record. That's where you can really see if a person is willing to make the tough decisions. Or in our state legislature, it's interesting to see when someone was absent from a vote. So a lot of times if there's a tough issue.
Are they ducking it?
Correct. And some of them do. I don't want to say a lot of them do, but a lot of them do.
And that's very telling.
It is very telling. Like, for example, if someone is constantly talking about how important water issues are, and then they don't show up to a big vote on something to protect a certain body of water from pollution or something like that, that tells you like they're not putting their money where their mouth is. So I look at those. If someone hasn't done that, I look at what they've done in the community. For example, have they been involved with nonprofits? What have they done for those nonprofits? Have they been involved what their profession is and what they do with that business? For example, if they own their own business and they have, 4 employees, but their employees are all their children, you know what I mean? Like I'm gonna take note of that, for better or worse. I'm just gonna take note of it. But really looking at what a person has done, like you said earlier, actions speak louder than words. So looking at what they've done in life, not just what they're saying to me on the campaign trail. Because like I said, a lot of times they tell you what they think you want to hear.
And too often the case is people have convenient opinions in the moment because they're trying to get elected or whatnot. And when you look at their history and the things they've done over their life, it doesn't line up. It's incongruent.
Right.
So, and usually you can't keep up that farce for too long, usually.
Right.
But in politics, you see it a lot, and they try their best to keep that face on, and sooner or later, you hope it catches up with them.
Now, one thing I don't like is when someone, maybe they've had a path in life, and then they get additional information and new information, and so they change their mind on an issue. And for some reason in politics, that's seen as a bad thing, like people, the whole flip-flopper and all that. And to me, that's actually what good leaders do.
Shows growth.
Correct. Is when you're presented with new information or different information, it might change your opinion. Like, I don't want politicians who just dig their heels in and say, I will always XYZ, because XYZ may not be what's best for the community at some point.
Right. Don't you think that shows some level of like emotional intelligence, being able to take different facts, apply them to a situation, and say, I was maybe wrong about this before?
Absolutely. And now, see, you just dangled the carrot of emotional intelligence in front of me, because I love to talk about that. But absolutely, I think that is exactly nail on the head. It is a level of emotional intelligence to be able to say, I was wrong on that issue. Or maybe you don't even have to go that far, but say, I felt this way, or I believed this at this point, but then with this new information we have, or this change in, whatever is happening, I realize that I need to shift gears. I need to change my opinion on that. Or, for example, in this city right now, a hot topic is short-term rentals. And so maybe someone was like, I am completely against short-term rentals for every, XY for the entire city, blah, blah, blah. And then when they're faced with new information about how short-term rentals are helping single women be able to purchase homes because they have some, passive income from the short-term rentals, maybe they're like, well, maybe they aren't that bad for the community, but we need to figure out a way to regulate them. And so I think that, is one of the things, is just being willing to be open to taking in new information and possibly changing your mind.
And being flexible, too. I mean, the idea, too, is they're not there to impart their opinions.
Right.
They're supposed to be representing people.
Right.
So as that changes, too, and the people they represent's opinions change and their feelings on different issues, they need to be able to modify and change with that as well, even though that sometimes may be incongruent with what they thought was a deep-seated belief at the time.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, to me, that's the ideal way to have an elected official behave, but it doesn't always happen. And in their defense, a lot of people will give them grief if they try to change their opinion.
For
Damned
sure.
if you do,
I
damned if
wish
you
that
don't.
would stop.
Yeah.
I wish that would stop.
Now, why don't you tell us, if you had to read one book, favorite book, what book would you recommend?
And this is going to make me sound kind of sappy. I love the book, The Notebook.
I've
I've read it a bazillion times. In fact, I think the first time I read it, I was crying, and it woke my roommate up in college because I was crying reading the book. So yeah, I have a soft side. Not everybody sees it, but.
All right, one last question we have for you today, Jenny. What is your, same question we give to every guest, what is your superpower? What is the one thing that you think you are uniquely gifted, talented with, you have one, you have many, but the one thing that you think really helps you accomplish a lot of the things that you're able to do in your law practice, philanthropy, and in politics?
I think that I'm good at connecting people. So, for example, I am usually good at figuring out who would be good friends. I'm usually good at figuring out who would be good in business together, or connecting people to nonprofits that they would be interested in, or some of that is like being intuitive or emotionally intelligent, is like knowing, kind of being able to pick up on people. But I think that is a unique talent I have, of just connecting people. I'm also very generous with my network. I say my network is yours. If you're a friend of mine, like, there's anyone that is in my network you want to meet, I'm happy to do that. And not everyone's like that. Not everyone shares their network. But I think that's one thing I'm good at is connections. And maybe that's a superpower. If so, maybe I need some sort of superhero name.
Well, I think it is a superpower. You are really good at it. I know it for a fact. And maybe we just get you a cape.
Ooh.
Would you like a cape?
I think I would. I love accessories, so that would just be a new one to add to the mix.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Jenny. You're a close friend of ours, a great attorney. We love having you at the firm and as a part of the firm. And I really respect a lot of the things that you're involved in both philanthropic efforts and your behind-the-scenes involvement in local politics and having a positive impact on a community. It's been a great discussion between that discussion that we had with you and our hot topics. Hopefully for good, we have put the legal issues surrounding the mayoral recall to rest, along with the terrifying, back-to-back terrifying topics from Brad this week of ChatGPT and how aliens are taking over our everyday lives. I thought we had a fascinating discussion today, and it was an awesome show. Thank you for being with us, Jenny. Thanks to all our guests for being here today. This is Overruled with Scott Vicknair, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.